Looking back on it now, all these years later, I still find it impossible to fully process what happened to me out in those canyons. I'm not the kind of person who makes up tales or embellishes the truth for effect, and I've never been someone who puts stock in folklore or myths. But what I experienced that autumn changed everything I believed I understood about reality, about faith, and about the hidden corners of creation. This is the account of how a Bigfoot came to me desperate for help, and how I ended up spending weeks with two creatures that most people insist don't even exist. It's an account about faith, about mercy, and about discovering that reality is far more mysterious and more magnificent than we ever conceived. I'd been working as a ranger for about 6 years when I got assigned to one of the most isolated stations in the state forest. The cabin sat at the rim of a deep canyon, surrounded by dense cedar forests and steep sandstone cliffs that stretched as far as you could see. On clear days, you could see formations in 4 different directions, their tops glowing a fiery red in the morning light, even in September. The canyon itself was a labyrinthine mix of ancient forest and rocky outcroppings, connected by game trails that had been there longer than recorded history. My job was straightforward enough in theory: monitor the mountain lion population as autumn approached. Make sure none of them were in danger of territory disputes, document their movements and hunting patterns, and report anything unusual to the main office 35 miles away. The station had everything I needed to survive for months at a stretch. A propane heater that kept the single room warm even when temperatures dropped well below freezing, a radio for my twice-weekly check-ins, shelves stocked with canned supplies and dried goods, and enough profound isolation to make a person either embrace their own company or lose their mind from the sheer loneliness. I chose that assignment deliberately, specifically requested it when the position became available. I'd always been a spiritual woman, raised attending services every Sunday with my family in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's affairs. My grandfather was the most faithful person I'd ever known, and he gave me a gold locket when I was 11 years old, making me promise to never remove it. I never have. That locket has been around my neck through everything. Through high school and college, through my ranger training, through every assignment I've taken. It's warm from my body heat now, worn smooth from decades of my fingers touching it when I pray or when I'm anxious. Being out in the wilderness has always helped me feel closer to the divine. There's something about the backcountry that strips away all the static and complications of normal life. No television, no internet, no throngs of people rushing through their hectic lives. Out there in that isolated cabin, it was just me, the canyons, and my faith. Just me and creation in its most authentic, untamed form. Every morning, before starting my rounds, I'd sit at the small wooden table by the window and read from my Bible, a worn leather-bound edition that my grandfather had also given me. Every night before sleep, I'd kneel beside my bunk and say my prayers, thanking the divine for another secure day and asking for watch over my family back home. The work itself wasn't physically demanding, though it required immense patience and focus. I'd wake with the sunrise, make coffee on the propane stove, eat a simple breakfast of granola or toast, and then head out into the forest with my binoculars, camera, and a weatherproof notebook where I recorded everything I observed. I'd hike for hours, following the game trails and dry creek beds, scanning the canyon floor for signs of mountain lion activity. Tracks in the dust, deep scratch marks on trees where they'd marked territory, scat that told me what they'd been eating, the occasional deer carcass that revealed their hunting patterns. I'd locate the lions themselves when I could, watching them from a safe distance through my binoculars. I documented what they hunted, how they moved through their territories, whether they looked healthy or showed any signs of injury or illness. Cougars mostly, though we'd get the occasional transient male passing through the area. I'd take photos with my camera, careful to stay downwind and silent so I wouldn't disturb them. Then I'd return to the cabin, write up detailed logs of everything I'd observed, fill out the official forms, and radio in my reports twice a week. By late September, the temperatures had started dropping significantly at night. I'd wake up to see condensation on the cabin windows, my breath visible in the cold air inside until I got the propane heater going. The cottonwoods in the canyon floor had already started turning a brilliant gold, and the first real frost had touched the higher elevations. The mountain lions were getting more active, taking advantage of the elk migration season. It was a critical time. If the lions didn't establish good hunting patterns before the deep cold set in, they might struggle through the lean months. I'd been tracking several lions in particular, a healthy female with 2 young juveniles and a large male, probably 180 pounds, with a scarred face from some old territorial fight. Everything seemed normal, just another season in the canyons, the natural cycle continuing as it had for thousands of years. Then one evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold and deep violet, I was outside the cabin, chopping kindling. The physical work felt good after a day of hiking, giving me time to think and pray while my body was occupied with the rhythm of swinging the hatchet. I had my rifle leaning against the woodpile, like always. Not that I expected trouble, but you don't take chances when you're alone in mountain lion country. It was loaded with heavy rounds designed to stop a charging predator if it came to that. I was focused on my work, enjoying the cool air on my face and the smell of fresh-cut cedar when I heard it. A sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before in all my years working in the wilderness. It started as a low rumble, almost like a moan, but deeper and more resonant, a sound that vibrated in my chest and made the hair on the back of my neck stand up instantly. I stopped mid-swing, the hatchet frozen above my head, and listened. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, no sound at all except that deep, rumbling moan. It was the kind of silence that comes when predators are near, when every small creature knows to hide and be still. Then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the fading light. The shape emerging from the tree line was enormous, easily 9 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown fur. It walked upright like a human, but moved with a power and grace that was utterly inhuman. The Bigfoot was massive, with shoulders broader than any human could ever be, arms that hung almost to its knees, and a face that was somewhere between human and ape, but was distinctly neither. My first instinct was terror, pure primal fear that flooded my system with adrenaline. I dropped the hatchet and lunged for my rifle, bringing it up to my shoulder with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. My finger found the trigger, and I prepared to fire, prepared to defend myself from whatever this creature was. But then, the Bigfoot did something that changed everything. It raised both massive hands in a gesture that was unmistakably human, a gesture of surrender or pleading. The creature made that deep rumbling sound again, but this time it was softer, almost pleading, and then, to my absolute shock, the Bigfoot dropped to its knees in the dirt. This massive creature, this impossible being, was kneeling before me in what could only be described as supplication. The Bigfoot was begging. I stood there frozen, my rifle still raised, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that I must be hallucinating. But the creature was right there in front of me, as real as the trees and the rocks and the cooling air on my skin. The Bigfoot made another sound, softer now, almost a whimper. Its eyes, deeply intelligent eyes that caught the last light of sunset, were fixed on me with an expression of desperate hope. This thing, whatever it was, needed something from me. Badly. My finger stayed on the trigger, but I didn't fire. Something in those eyes stopped me. And in that pause, the Bigfoot made one more sound and gestured toward the forest behind it. toward the deeper wilderness. The creature wanted me to follow. Every practical instinct I had told me this was insane, told me to fire a warning shot and get back in the cabin and lock the door. But there was something else speaking to me in that moment, something deeper. It was the same voice that had always guided me in matters of faith. The creature needed help. And despite my fear, despite the impossibility of the situation, I knew I was being called to provide it. I lowered my rifle slowly. The Bigfoot watched this action and made a sound that might have been relief. Then the creature stood, moving with surprising grace, and began walking back toward the tree line. It paused after a few steps and looked back at me, clearly waiting. I hesitated for another long moment. This could be a trap, my rational mind insisted. But then I touched the locket at my throat, felt its familiar weight and warmth, and thought about real faith, the kind that asks you to step into darkness when called. I grabbed my flashlight and my medical kit from the cabin, moved by an instinct I didn't fully understand. Then I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer for protection, and followed the creature into the forest. The Bigfoot moved quickly, but it kept stopping and waiting for me to catch up, deliberately careful not to lose me. We moved deeper into the canyon, away from the trails I knew, into territory I'd never explored. The sun had fully set now, and I was relying on my flashlight and the occasional glimpses of the Bigfoot's dark form ahead. We hiked for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes. The terrain got rougher, steeper, harder to navigate. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing beside a rock overhang, and that's when I saw the second Bigfoot. This one was smaller, maybe only 3 feet tall, with lighter colored fur that was almost cinnamon in the beam of my flashlight. A baby. The baby Bigfoot was lying on the ground, curled up on a bed of pine needles and leaves. Even from a distance, I could tell something was terribly wrong. The little creature was shivering despite the mildness of the season, making small, whimpering sounds that went straight to my heart. Its breathing was labored, rapid, and shallow. The larger Bigfoot, the father I now realized, moved to the baby's side and made soft, rumbling sounds, clearly trying to comfort it. Then the father looked back at me and gestured toward the baby, the meaning absolutely clear. "Help, please help." I knelt beside the baby, setting down my rifle but keeping it within reach. Up close, I could see that the little Bigfoot's left arm was swollen and discolored, the fur matted with something that looked like dried pus. An infection, a bad one. The father had brought me here to save its baby's life. I looked up at the massive creature standing over us and saw fear in its eyes, the same fear any parent feels when their child is sick. How could I refuse? I opened my medical kit with shaking hands. The wound looked like it might have been from a thorn or broken branch. The infection was spreading up the arm in angry red streaks. Without antibiotics, this baby would likely die within days. I had strong broad-spectrum ones in my kit. It was a risk, but doing nothing was a certain death sentence. I looked at the father Bigfoot and tried to communicate my intentions, showing it the antibiotic bottle, miming giving medicine. The father watched my gestures with those intelligent eyes and then made a soft rumbling sound and stepped back slightly. Permission granted, trust given. I spent the next hour treating the baby Bigfoot. First, I cleaned the infected area as gently as I could with antiseptic, wincing every time the baby whimpered. The father hovered close, making soft sounds that seemed designed to soothe. Then I applied antibiotic ointment and bandaged the wound carefully. Finally, I prepared an injection of oral antibiotics, calculated the dosage based on the baby's approximate weight, and administered it slowly. When I was finished, I sat back on my heels. The father Bigfoot looked back at me, and in that moment, I felt a connection that transcended species. The creature then did something that made my breath catch. It reached out one massive hand and gently, carefully, touched the locket at my throat. Just touched it with one finger, the gesture deliberate and meaningful. It was acknowledging something, my faith maybe, or the care I'd shown. Then the Bigfoot looked at me expectantly. It took me a moment to understand. The baby needed continued care, multiple doses over several days. The father Bigfoot wanted me to bring them to my cabin. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Bring two Bigfoots to my ranger station? It went against every protocol, every rule, every bit of common sense. But looking at that sick baby, looking at the desperate hope in the father's eyes, I knew what I had to do. I nodded and gestured back toward the direction of the cabin. The father understood immediately. It bent down and carefully, so carefully, lifted the baby in its arms. Then we began the trek back to the cabin, the three of us moving through the dark forest together. Getting back to the cabin took longer. The father Bigfoot moved more slowly now, careful not to jostle the baby. When we finally approached the cabin, the creature followed me right to the door, ducked to fit through the frame, and entered without hesitation. Over the next 2 weeks, the cabin became a strange sanctuary, a place where the impossible became routine. I treated the baby's infection with antibiotics and careful wound care 3 times a day. The father Bigfoot watched every treatment, learning what I was doing, and eventually began helping, holding the baby still or bringing me supplies before I even asked. The creature was remarkably intelligent, able to understand my gestures and intentions with minimal repetition. We developed a kind of communication, not with words, but with sounds and gestures. The father would make different rumbling sounds that I came to recognize. One meant the baby was in pain. Another meant thank you. Another meant the creature needed to go outside, presumably to hunt or relieve itself. The father was mostly vegetarian, it seemed, leaving at night to forage and always returning before dawn with strange roots and plants that it would share with me. The baby improved steadily. By the 3rd day, the fever had broken. By the 5th day, it was able to sit up. By the end of the 1st week, the little Bigfoot was playing, curious about everything from my books to my cooking utensils. The baby was particularly fascinated by my locket, reaching for it with small, delicate hands whenever I came close. I'd let the baby hold it sometimes, watching as those tiny fingers traced the engraving. The father would watch these interactions with what I could only describe as approval. I continued my ranger duties as best I could, radioing in my reports and speaking in vague terms about being unable to travel far due to a minor injury. I couldn't exactly tell my supervisors that I was nursing a baby Bigfoot back to health. During the quiet evenings, I would read from my Bible. The father Bigfoot would watch me, head tilted slightly, clearly listening. There was something reverential in its attention, something that made me think it recognized the spiritual nature of what I was doing. Sometimes I would pray aloud, and the father Bigfoot would make soft sounds that felt like it was adding its own voice to mine. By the end of the 2nd week, the baby was fully recovered. The infection was gone, the wound was healing cleanly, and the little Bigfoot was active and playful again. It was time for them to return to the wilderness. I knew it, and the father Bigfoot knew it too. On the morning they left, I prepared supplies for them: my best blanket, some of my non-perishable food, and a small first aid kit. The father Bigfoot accepted these gifts with that same gesture of gratitude, touching the locket at my throat one last time. The baby reached for me, and I picked up the little creature one last time, holding it close. I kissed the top of its head and whispered a prayer for its safety. Then I handed the baby back to its father. At the threshold, the father Bigfoot paused, looked back at me one last time, and made a sound that was clearly goodbye. Then the creature walked into the forest and disappeared into the trees. I stood there watching until I could no longer see them. The cabin felt empty now, too quiet. I could see where the father had sat on the floor, could see the impression the baby had left on my bunk. Small reminders of an experience that already felt like a dream, but I knew it was real. As I stood there in the empty cabin, I touched the locket around my neck and whispered a prayer of thanks. Life went back to normal after that, or as normal as it could be. I continued my work monitoring the mountain lions, but everything felt different. Every time I went into the forest, I'd look for signs of the Bigfoots. I never saw them again. They had gone back to their hidden world. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? They'd want proof, photographs, or physical evidence. But I have no proof except my memories and the knowledge in my heart that it was real. Sometimes I find a strand of reddish-brown fur caught on the edge of my bunk, or a massive footprint in the dust near my cabin that couldn't belong to any known animal. And I know it was real. That autumn in the canyons changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It taught me that there are mysteries in the wilderness that science hasn't discovered. It taught me that kindness and compassion aren't uniquely human traits. It taught me that faith means choosing to help even when you're terrified. Most of all, it taught me that we're not alone in this world in the way we think we are. I still wear my grandfather's locket. I still read my Bible every morning and say my prayers every night, but now when I pray, I include the father and the baby in my thoughts. I don't know if Bigfoots have souls the way humans do, but I know they're part of creation. They deserve respect and protection and kindness. They deserve to live in peace in their hidden world, free from human interference. Sometimes on quiet nights, I'll hear a sound in the distance, a low rumble, almost like the sounds the father used to make. I'll go to the window and look out at the forest, and I'll wonder if it's them out there somewhere. I'll wonder if they remember me the way I remember them. I like to think they're doing well, and maybe, just maybe, the father tells the baby about the autumn when it was sick, about the human who helped, about the strange time they spent in a cabin with someone who should have been their enemy, but chose instead to be their friend. That's my hope anyway. That's my prayer. And that's the least I can do for the creatures who taught me so much about compassion and trust and the magnificent mysteries of the natural world.